So we're going to be working with kiln clay to make a figure. And the kiln clay, once we get the figure completed, we'll put it in the kiln and harden it. And then you'll have the option of glazing it afterwards, and we'll put it in the kiln again so that the glaze melts. Or you'll have the option of spray painting it with like an antique bronze spray paint or whatever spray paint you want. So first of all, I just cut a template of a figure out, and I'm gonna see if I can separate these legs just a teeny bit, so to make the cutting a little bit easier. And I'm gonna just take a butter knife. In the classroom, it'll be a fettling knife, which is a similar thing. And I'm gonna cut a little bit, I'm gonna make her a little bit larger than she is, because she's kind of a skinny figure, and you can always, it's easier to take off rather than to add on. So I'm just gonna give myself a little leeway here and give her hips a little bit more bulk. And you'll be doing a lot more shaping on this. The template is mainly to get the proportions right. And this is a pretty thick piece of clay. It's a little over an inch, and we'll be thinning it out at the hands and the feet. Let's see, I should have cut that all the way through. There we go. And let's see, I'm going to take off this bottom part first. This is very wet clay, so it wants to stick to itself. Okay, so once we have finished with the template, I'm just going to take it off. It got a little wet, so it's wanting to stick. Okay. So I have like a little gingerbread woman, and I'm going to want to thin out the arms and the legs a bit at the ends towards the hands and the feet. And I would use a wire tool. I don't have my wire tool, so I'm just going to use a piece of wire because it'll do the same thing. So I'm just going to trim this down, make it a bit thinner than the rest, because we tend to thin down at the feet and the ankles and at the wrists. So I'm going to trim quite a bit off here. And then I'm gonna trim the edges, so we're not gonna have this hard edged figure. You wanna sort of soften the edges, give the body curves instead of angles. And I'm gonna work quickly, partly for the sake of not having a really long video, but also you definitely want to get the figure in the pose that you're doing the first class that you work with it. I mean, you'll still do a lot of sculpting once it's in the pose, but you want to get it in the pose because it does, between classes, even if you wet it, it does tend to start to harden. And if you're trying to pose something that's had several days or a week to harden, then it's going to be really tricky because your clay is going to be cracking and you'll have all sorts of problems. So even if the figure is really, really rough, you can put it in a pose and then work on details. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time I'm going to add a little clay to fatten it up, but I'm going to turn it over. Well, let me do the head here and the shoulders and the arms. All right, so I'm gonna turn it over so I can do the same thing on the other side. Get rid of these hard edges. Now I could also, I'm gonna try it with the rib tool. I could also just take my rib tool and smooth this down. That's gonna be a little quicker. I mean, it tends to want to, rather than come off, move into the figure, but that's okay because we're going to be fattening her up anyway, so. And I think I'm going to use this on the arms just because I can get in closer. All right, now I'm going to add a little clay. So I've still got her face down. I'm going to add a little clay, give her a butt here. And you want to make sure when you add the clay, I should have some water here. And it's wet enough that just a little water would work. But for the sake of the video, I'm just going to go ahead and push this on, and I'm moving up and down and back and forth, and if you have a little water under there, that's really going to connect the clay. Now if the clay has dried at all, you would need to scratch the clay with either a needle tool or something sharp, you would just scratch it and then make some slip, which is a little clay with water in it, and stick that in there and then put the other clay on. But I'm going to be quick here and just add it. And I'm going to add something to the back here, because the back is going to come out with shoulder blades and muscles. You have muscles on either side of the backbone. And maybe a little something on the calves. Build up a little bit of a calf muscle there. And you'll still be adding and taking away once your figure is in position. So I'm going to try not to flatten that out too much. And give her some breasts. And you can do a figure with clothing, but it's a little easier to do a nude because you don't have to deal with wrinkles and stuff. But if you want that challenge, you can put it in a costume of some sort or an outfit. So I'm going to build a little bit up on the stomach. And you really don't have to worry about making a face, but you could, you could make a suggestion of a face. You don't want to try to get detailed. You definitely don't want to scratch in like a smile or something, because it looks really kind of dopey on these if you do that. So I am going to round the head out a bit. So I'll give myself some clay so that I can do a little modeling, very subtle modeling. And the main thing you want to build out on the head is this back. You want to have room for the cranium here. So you want to really build out the back of the head. And you could do that when the figure is posed. I'm going to do it part way right now, but so I'm just going to make a little bit of a chin. I can make some impressions of where the eyes would be. So this is a very crude face, but it's just sort of a suggestion because we want to know which way the figure is looking and to have all right, so I can take a clay shaping tool here and get in there to make a little bit more of an eye socket. And I really am not going to get into making a face per se, just a suggestion of facial features. Now, I wish I had a photo here. Now, it's going to be kind of stiff, so you're really going to have to kind of bend and fold. So, say she's sitting with her knee up. So, I'm really going to have to pull this knee kind of up into a point because we don't want to make a Gumby kind of figure. You don't want to have bending bones and you know, curves for the joints instead of angles. So you want to kind of pull that knee up into an angle. I want to thin that ankle. I might need to add a little bit underneath this to give it a heel to kind of hold that foot up. And let's say she's got this other foot out like this. Maybe she's resting her hands on her knees, so I can squeeze her hand out into just sort of a paddle. And again, I'm really folding here where it's a little hard to see. I'm folding where the elbow is. And I might need to cut a little bit more under the arm here. And I want to bring that out as though it's bending at the shoulder, and then make a paddle out of the hand. I can squish that a bit to thin it out. And I have to remember that it's about halfway to the elbow, you know, from the fingers to elbow and shoulder to elbow. So I don't want to bend here because that's bending the bone at the forearm. So I want to figure out where half of that arm is and bend it there so that my elbow is in the right place. So I'd say it's about right here. You could even measure if you're not sure. And sometimes these figures, depending on the pose, sometimes they'll need to be propped up with a piece of wood or a little rock or something. So she's going to be bending in, maybe looking up. So basically, you want to make sure that you at least get to this point at the end of the first class. And then you'll be able to do a lot more. And you'll be able to probably get something a little less crude than this done by the first day, but and even just having a little ridge for the spine that is a little indentation can add a lot, and it's not hard to do. So I'm not going to get into detail back here. I'll do another video for getting into a little detail, but for this first session, you want to just get your figure fleshed out and into the basic pose. And if the figure is falling over or something, I could create, I don't know, a little rolled up cardboard tube or something to hold the head up. You can also use little pieces of clay that you wrap in plastic wrap. And, you know, if this ankle keeps bending down or something, you could just put a little piece of clay behind it with plastic wrap to keep it in place so that as it does start to get a little bit of air and solidify a little bit, then it's not going to dry sinking, you know, so it's not going to have weird curves where it's not supposed to have curves. And then once you've got it in the pose, you'll be able to take say a little fettling knife. I'm using a butter knife instead. The fettling knives are a little thinner and you can get into places, but you'll be able to trim things down and add little pieces of clay. And then in the end, we will need to do a little bit of hollowing the figure out. which this isn't ready to do yet. It has to have a little stiffness to do that, but what we would be doing is basically just scooping out from the bottom and then possibly putting a core up in there, say with a clay tool, so that the air can get up into the center as it dries. And also, you don't want to have really thick areas in the kiln, because sometimes the clay doesn't dry out all the way, and that can end up cracking or even exploding. You want to try to have the clay fairly evenly thick throughout. But if you do have a core up in the body, then that allows the gases that build up in the clay to circulate. And you wouldn't want to hollow this out and then put clay on top of that, because you don't want to have any trapped air in these in the kiln. So basically, that's what you'll be doing for the first class. I've got a little bit of a club foot here, so take something off. And then I'll do another more detailed video to go on from there.